Welcome to Channel's Business Globe with me, Juliana Olayinka, reporting from just outside the Palace of Westminster in central London, where global power, policy and markets intersect. Coming up on today's show, Britain's Prime Minister is fighting for his political life as the King's speech took place just metres from where I'm standing. 4 ministers have resigned, over 90 Labour MPs have called on Keir Starmer to go, and his most powerful rival is preparing to mount a formal challenge. Is this the end of his premiership? And France has pledged 23 billion euros to Africa at the Nairobi summit. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu was in the room. Macron called it a partnership of equals, but is Africa finally getting what it deserves, or is this still someone else's agenda? I speak with policy analyst Ovigwe Eguegu of Development Reimagined. Then later, Africa's startup ecosystem is booming, but a talent crisis is brewing. Nigeria's Moneypoint says it cannot fill 500 roles. Benjamin Dada of TechNext tells us what is really going on. But first, it has been the most turbulent week in British politics in years. The state opening of Parliament on Wednesday gave Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer a brief moment of pageantry, but the political crisis surrounding his leadership has only intensified. Over 90 Labour MPs have called on Starmer to set a date for his departure. 4 junior ministers resigned this week, including Jess Phillips, the Minister for Safeguarding, and Health Secretary Wes Streeting, widely seen as Starmer's most credible rival, met the Prime Minister in Downing Street for just 16 minutes before allies confirmed he was preparing to mount a formal leadership challenge. The Labour Party is now at war with itself. More than 100 MPs have signed a letter backing Starmer. An almost equal number want him gone. The SNP has tabled a no-confidence vote, and the question hanging over Westminster this week is not whether a challenge is coming, but whether the Prime Minister can survive it. For the Nigerian and African diaspora communities concentrated across British cities, this matters beyond Westminster gossip. Who leads Britain, what they prioritise, and how stable this government remains will shape immigration policy, bilateral trade, and the UK-Africa relationship built so carefully over the past year.
Mr. Speaker, I know the convention is for this to be a light-hearted debate. But as I've already said, this is a highly unusual moment. The Prime Minister is in office, but not in power. Everyone is trying to pretend it's all right. It's not all right. In the past 48 hours, nearly 100 Labour MPs have called for the Prime Minister to resign. 4 ministers have quit. It is clear his authority has gone, and that he will not be able to deliver what little there is in this King's speech. This is a government less than 2 years in office, which has already run out of ideas and run out of road. So how did we get here? There is a great line in the musical Hamilton, Mr. Speaker. Winning is easy, governing is harder. Everything that has gone wrong in Labour's first 2 years comes back to one problem. They came into office with no plan. They did not understand the difference between winning an election and governing a country. It was very easy to make promises in opposition, promises to freeze council tax, promises to take £300 off energy bills, promises to the WASPy women. Hundreds of Labour MPs took photos with them to post on their Facebook pages and their websites and their election leaflets, but at no point did they bother to think how would they deliver any of it. They didn't spend their time in opposition thinking deeply about the country's problems. They assumed that governing in the 2020s would be like governing in the 1990s. But it isn't. Britain is facing new structural problems. We have an ageing... Mr. Speaker, they'll shout at me. I know they can't wait to get back to their plotting, but it's quite important that we hear what is going to be said. Because we have an ageing population, a falling birth rate, and a welfare bill that is spiralling out of control. We have an information revolution in the shape of AI that threatens to unravel the world of work as we know it, and the cost of energy is driving industry out of the country. Labour were taken by surprise that we are living in a more competitive and increasingly hostile world. Their manifesto was just a set of misleading promises. They promised no new taxes on working people. Fail. They promised to crack down on illegal immigration. Fail. They promised to tread more lightly on people's lives. Epic fail.
And while Britain's political drama unfolds here at Westminster, the world's most consequential diplomatic summit has been underway in Beijing this week. United States President Donald Trump arrived in China on Wednesday for a 4-day state visit, his first trip since 2017 and the first American presidential visit to the country in nearly a decade. Accompanying him is a delegation of America's most powerful business figures, including Elon Musk of Tesla, Nvidia's Jensen Huang, and Apple's Tim Cook. Trump and President Xi met for over 2 hours. Xi called for the two countries to be partners, not rivals, while delivering a stark warning that mishandling Taiwan could put the entire relationship in great jeopardy. China's foreign ministry described the economic trade outcomes as generally balanced and positive. At the heart of the agenda is a deal on rare earth elements, the critical minerals that power AI, electric vehicles and modern defence systems. And here is what matters for Africa. Those rare earths lie largely beneath African soil. The same week that France was in Nairobi pledging investment in the continent, America was in Beijing negotiating for the same resources. How this summit resolves will shape whether Africa captures the value of what lies beneath its soil or watches the world's two superpowers carve it up between themselves. Which brings us directly to what happened in Nairobi this week, where the world's attention should have been fixed. The inaugural Africa Forward Summit brought together more than 30 African heads of state, 1,500 business leaders and French President Emmanuel Macron for 2 days of high-level engagement on the future of Africa-France relations. For the first time, the summit was co-hosted with an English-speaking African country, a deliberate signal that France is rewriting its relationship with the continent. Macron announced 23 billion euros of investment, 14 billion from French companies and 9 billion from African ones, spanning energy transition, agriculture and artificial intelligence, with a commitment to 250,000 jobs. African leaders used the second day to push for reforms to reduce their borrowing costs, and Macron said he supported a first loss guarantee mechanism to de-risk investment on the continent. President Tinubu was in the room. So one question that everybody is asking is this a partnership of equals, or is it Africa on France's terms? I've been speaking with Ovigwe Egwegu, policy analyst at Development Reimagined.
So basically, if we look at France's relationship with African countries and the dynamics and how the changes have been happening in recent years, it is not necessarily problematic because of a lack of investment from France. The main issue has always been addressing neo-colonial and imperial, structures that were put together after independence. So things like the CFA franc, monetary policy, right of first refusal. So there's a whole system that it was called at the time really a pact for the continuation of colonization, right? So within that system, of course, there are French investments were coming in, but primarily the challenge that countries have had with France is how do we transform this system to have a more balanced and equitable relationship? So when you see for the first time President Macron hosting the Africa Summit or France-African Summit in Africa, in an African or Anglophone capital or whatever, this summit was traditionally held in France. It is because there's an awareness that there needs to be some form of structural transformation in how France engages with the continent, right? And the announcement of this amount of money is meant to facilitate French investment into the continent in health sector, energy, critical minerals, and strategic raw materials, which the French industries, they need. So that is, I think, the important historical context that needs to be communicated for us to really understand why the summit is being held in Nairobi, why there's a lot of effort to characterize France as a different partner from the past. Nigeria remains a very important country on the continent. It's, the side of our economy, one of the most populous country on the continent. We have such a huge cultural and social influence, but even institutional influence within the ECOWAS and the African Union. So having the Nigerian president in Nairobi attending this event must have been a real priority for the French side. As for Nigeria, we've seen you could say an enhancement in our relationship with France since President Tinubu. A lot of people are still asking for what are the objectives, where does France really come in, what can France really provide the continent, the country based on our national conditions, whether it's security, whether it's economic. Of course, there will be some form of areas where cooperation can be made, but primarily, I think people are a bit confused because if we see the reputation that France has developed for itself in many African countries, that question is this the country we should be moving closer to? And I think President Tinubu, in his foreign policy, the priority he has given to France, the jury is still out in terms of what has the benefit been, and I don't think anybody can point to any main tangible benefit yet. Maybe something else can come up before the end of their terms. If we see how Trump has been relating with the continent also, there's been a lot of emphasis on getting access to these critical and strategic raw materials like cobalt, lithium, graphite, and that has really been if not only the only priority that they've had. Look at the deal with the DRC, for instance. Look at the health partnership, the so-called health partnership deal that they are signing. A lot of it has to do with giving preferential access and treatment to U.S. Mining companies to get access to these critical and strategic raw materials. So, in all, while Africa may not necessarily be a priority on the agenda, whatever is discussed there will definitely impact the continent, whether it's what they discuss around this issue we have in Iran and the Strait of Hormuz. That is going to be of importance because fertilizer prices, as we know, is growing. It's really higher than it was before the war, and that is affecting agricultural industry. So there will be second order effects on whatever they decide. But the continent itself, I think, is really peripheral to the conversation. That being said, we need to be very cautious and very clear-eyed and really follow these meetings very, very well. I think the Chinese have a very strong hand, or as the Americans say, they have all the cards, at least very strong cards, I should say. And let's see how the Trump administration would play in this tango they have with the Chinese.
Still to come on Channel's Business Global, the biggest business stories of the week. Benjamin Dada of TechNext on Africa's startup ecosystem and what the Money Point talent debate really tells us. And an exclusive clip from this week's book launch here in London, Raising Futures, The Cost of Failed Parenthood by Chike Stanley. All of this after the break. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, reporting from just outside the Palace of Westminster in central London, where global power, policy and markets intersect. In a moment, Benjamin Dada on Africa's startup ecosystem. But until then, here's a breakdown of some of the biggest business news stories of the week. Dangote Cement made it official this week, confirming in a stock exchange announcement that it is in the preliminary stages of a secondary listing on the London Stock Exchange, with JP Morgan, Citigroup and Standard Bank appointed as advisors. Africa's largest cement producer, valued at $13 billion is targeting September for the listing, with 10% of shares to be sold to international investors while maintaining its primary listing in Lagos. There's a landmark moment for African capital markets and a story our audience of Nigerian investors and diaspora professionals will be watching very closely. A new study has found that the number of foreign students at American universities dropped by an average of 20% this spring, the direct result of the Trump administration's visa crackdown and its broader pressure campaign on higher education. The findings from a survey of 149 American schools shows that 62% reported lower international enrollment across both undergraduate and graduate programs. For Nigerian families, among the largest groups of African students in the US, this is significant and a deeply personal story. Universities warn that if the trend continues into the autumn semester, some institutions could face serious budget shortfalls. And in aviation, Ethiopian Airlines is in early talks with Airbus to purchase up to 6 wide-body A350 jets and around 20 of the smaller A220 regional aircraft as Africa's largest carrier accelerates its ambition to become a global connector, rivaling Turkish Airlines and Emirates. The state-owned carrier is also developing a multi-billion-dollar airport in Addis Ababa with capacity for 60 million passengers annually, scaling to 110 million by 2036. African aviation ambition at its most compelling. Africa's technology sector is growing fast and Nigeria is at the heart of it. Moneypoint has just become the continent's latest profitable fintech unicorn, backed by Google, Visa and the IFC. But as investment flows in and ambitions scale up, a critical question is emerging. Does Africa have the talent to match its own momentum? Nigeria's Moneypoint says it cannot fill 500 vacant roles. The CEO's comments sparked a fierce national debate about talent, opportunity and what it really takes to build a world-class technology company on the continent. I've been speaking with Benjamin Dada, technology journalist who's just published a major report on the state of African startup funding in partnership with FCMB's Startup Hub.
Is it a talent gap? I think that there's a bit of stereotyping in that comment where, because of the nascency of our ecosystem in Africa, we feel like, we cannot find senior talent to help us scale startups, because many people always attribute the birth of startups in Nigeria to like 2011. Meanwhile, other markets have like Google that was born in 1995. So I think there's one layer of residual knowledge of, oh, if you want to grow your company to a Google or to an Airbnb, you need to go find people who are outside Nigeria. So I think there's one layer of that. In terms of pay, I think Moneypoint pays well, in my personal experience and in my conversation with other people. So it might just be a case of maybe your negotiation or your location, because they hire from different parts of the world. So I think pay is not going to be too much of an issue and it wouldn't weigh much. In terms of pipeline, I would just say pipeline is still similar to the first point of talent gap. So I would say that there's a bit of stereotyping to say you cannot find the talent you need. But if we dig deep, we might be able to isolate, is it for what roles? Because Moneypoint has different parts. So they have agents, these are field agents, but they also have people that are in the office, So what roles are you trying to hire for? And in what case are you trying to say there is, you can't find the vacancies? All that said, this is his personal opinion, and I don't think anybody should fight him for his personal opinion. He's saying it as his lived experience, his personal opinion. So, you just take it on one hand and then you do your own research on the other hand. So that's how I would see it. A money point shows us that, it's possible to grow your company from a country in Africa and, get to one of the later stages of venture capital. But the reality, as with other parts of the world, is only like 1 in 10 startups survive in the long run. But when you're at Series A, I find that in the US, and we put that in the report, in the US, that success rate from seed stage to Series A was about 15 to 30%, when you consider the post-COVID era and the before-COVID era. But in Africa, it's still about 10%. So we're not doing too badly when it comes to the graduation from C to Series A. But the reality, which is even more interesting, is we saw 15% of all the startups that raised seed died. So essentially, we had more people die than more people go into Series A, right? But when you look at the companies that raised Series B, Kuda, Number, Fair Money, Money Point, Flutterwave, they are some of the there are some of the exceptions, to be fair, in the grand scheme of things. But they also show that it is possible to grow your company and build a successful business in Africa. Yeah. It requires government input as much as it requires private sector input, as much as it requires, I'll call education a bit of social, which is both like government and private, right? There is a company called Hotels.ng. They were one of the earliest startups in Nigeria, and they invested so deeply in talent pipeline as a company. In fact, they spun it off from Hotels.ng to call HNG internships, and they've trained thousands and thousands of people, right? So there is that part of companies building out the pipeline and training people. But then the current minister of ICT in Nigeria was also once a startup personality. So when he brought up 3MTT, that was part of what he was thinking about, to say, the startups alone cannot fill this talent gap. I want 3MTT to be a way to support the growing African or the growing Nigeria ecosystem with talent. So that's one way the government is playing a role. But also, there were companies that built their entire thesis on training. So we had Andela back in the day. It's like an edtech. It was an edtech-ish company. We had a bunch of them, Decagon, HCC. So it requires everybody playing their own part in making sure that the talents that we want to build our companies are being prepared in Nigeria. Education is another thing, but education tends to be a more lagging player, because the process of changing the curriculum takes longer than what a one-man business or what a limited liability company can do, right? So, if you want to do curriculum changes in education, I think you need to go through approval. You cannot just say, oh, you're doing this course and doing that course. So yes, education can play a role, but it requires all hands to be on deck.
And finally, this week in Westminster, a Nigerian author launched a book that speaks directly to one of the most important conversations our continent needs to have. Chike Stanley, global change agent, youth advocate and founder of the Future Rivers Initiative, launched Raising Futures, the Cost of Failed Parenthood, at a special event here in London. His argument is powerful and deeply personal. The problems we see in our societies, the pressure on young people, the broken communities, the cost of unfulfilled potential, do not start in government. They start at home.
I call this my masterpiece because it's a problem that we have ignored for long. This is a problem that revolves around the society. Whether we like it or not, it takes a family to produce a community. So when you get it wrong from the family level, it's a problem to the society. So when you have a lot of bad seeds and a good one mixing, what do you provide to the society? That one. Secondly, the parents are supposed to take responsibility. People don't take responsibility what they've done wrong. So people grow up blaming the society, blaming the government, blaming their uncles, blaming people who are doing well without blaming their parents. So they shift the blame. So who is supposed to blame your parents? So you understand that in the society where we grow up, young girls, young boys who go into a lot of illegal businesses just to get their parents out of the slum, just to give their parents a good life, a responsibility being transferred to an adolescent. It's a problem. So a child wants to come back and celebrate his mom that didn't do well, that didn't set up proper foundation and platform. So the question is, if you know what made them fail, it will be a better direction, a better navigation for you as a person. It is not too big. People can fail. But when you fail, accept responsibility that you have failed, know what made you fail, and know how to navigate yourself, because the first problem is finding solution to the problem. So when you find the solution to the problem, it's half solved.
Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today. But as always, do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.